A very good evening to all. Dr. Pawan Goenka, Mr. Shrinivas Dempo, ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure to have you with us in AIMA's third Management Café this week. Today, we are privileged to have one of the Indian automotive sector's iconic leaders for a conversation on India's march towards becoming a manufacturing powerhouse. Dr. Goenka, it is a pleasure to have you with us, and many thanks for agreeing to do this session. You have been the driver of one of India's most celebrated manufacturing stories of these times. Under your leadership, Mahindra Group's identity has changed from a maker of tractors and rural vehicles to a maker of popular urban SUVs, and its brand has reconnected with the legacy of the iconic Willys Jeeps. Your transformation of the R&D and the market focus at Mahindra and Mahindra has resulted in the introduction of popular SUVs such as Scorpio, XUV, and Thar. Before joining Mahindra and Mahindra, you worked at General Motors R&D Center in Detroit, and you brought the necessary design and engineering know-how to Mahindra to transform its product portfolio and corporate image. You continue to remain involved with technology and innovation, and you are the chair of the Board of Governors of IIT Madras and IIT Bombay. You chair the Ministry of Commerce and Industry Steering Committee for Advancing Local Value Add and Exports, SCALE, and you also chair the Indian Space Promotion Authorization Center, InSpace, which is part of the Department of Space. In addition, you're a director on the boards of some very innovative companies such as Bosch and Sun Pharma. Many thanks for joining us and a very warm welcome to you. Srini, it's always a pleasure to have you, and thank you for agreeing to moderate this conversation with Dr. Goenka. You lead one of India's best-known business houses, which has interest across mining, manufacturing, and services. You're also an astute student of economic and industrial trends, and we look forward to an exciting conversation between you and Dr. Goenka. Many thanks for joining us today, and a warm welcome to you. Ladies and gentlemen, manufacturing has had an important role to play in India's economic transformation and its economic growth. Successive governments have talked about raising manufacturing share in the country's GDP to at least 25%, and the present government has come up with a production-linked incentive scheme to attract domestic and foreign investment in high-priority manufacturing. India already is among the world's leading producers in many key sectors, such as automotive, metals, and pharmaceuticals, and now it is being seen as a high potential prospect for global supply chains for everything. Today, we are privileged to have Dr. Goenka with us, who has proven that India can make innovative products to rival the world's best. And we look forward to a great chat between him and Mr. Dempo. With these words, it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Dempo to conduct the session. Over to you, Srini.
Thank you, Rekha, and let me also add my own welcome to everybody in this Management Cafe series hosted by AIMA, and a very warm and special welcome to our guest speaker of today, Dr. Pawan Goenka. Dr. Goenka, this is an absolute delight, pleasure, and a privilege for me to be able to speak to you today and moderate the session. Just to give you a few personal experiences, I've been a shareholder of Mahindra and Mahindra for I don't know how many years or how many generations, but the stellar journey that you have led Mahindra and Mahindra into is something that I'm really proud as a shareholder. And I hold you in absolute high esteem, respect. So this is a personal privilege and a pleasure for me to do this session with you. And I have a number of questions for you, but we'll have to balance it out between my questions and the audience questions. But a warm welcome. And you've been absolutely your academic and your professional journey, if you see, right from the IITs to the world famous Cornell, to working in General Motors for almost 14 years, and then 27 years leading such a manufacturing powerhouse. And as Rekha has said, you changed the complete image of Mahindra and Mahindra. Just to also let you know, my only self-driven car is a Mahindra Thar. I have other cars which my drivers drive, but I have a Thar which I personally requested your people to allocate me one of the, the first vehicles in Goa. And I'm telling you how proud I am to drive that car. And it's an absolute beauty. So I must give you this feedback since I'm talking to you. We are really keen to hear your perspectives on Indian manufacturing, basically more on the positive side, what's its potential. And I know you had a very important committee that is Scale, which Rekha has talked about. I'm also very excited to know from you what's happening in InSpace. But that's something that I think a lot of people would be very keen to know. If you can share with us some of the initiatives that the government is thinking about. I know you chair this very important body. And there are a host of other things in my mind, and I'll come to specific questions when the Q&A starts. But just to lay the context, everybody talks about China versus India. And, the kind of scale, because we have been suppliers to steel mills in China, the kind of scale that China has attained, a devil's advocate will India ever be able to achieve those scales? And if India can achieve those scales, then great, because you have an alternate supply chain for the world. But if India can't achieve those scales, then do you have any out-of-box ideas in terms of what India could do? I know that the scale has set very ambitious targets to double exports in 5 years, to minimize imports in 5 years, to lay stress on $1 trillion manufacturing economy. Are these all real? And how do you see the roadmap for all this? Coming to the current geopolitical situation, I think India is in a very sweet spot. I think we're doing the right things, but how does the global manufacturing countries look at us? Are they willing to accept us as a very reliable value chain supplier? And, the one more question that was upmost in my mind, and I know that you've done brilliant work in Mahindra & Mahindra in terms of, I was reading one of your interviews when you said you visited your Nasik R&D facility and you said, this is really primitive. And then I think you went back to Mr. Mahindra. Mr. Mahindra supported you. And we've seen how you use technology, to get the cars. I told you I own a Thar, and I said, it's an international car for me by any standards. Also, your experiences with, the various global alliances that you stuck. I know some worked, some didn't, but, what was your experiences with global alliances, like with Renault, with Navistar, with Chrysler? So a lot of questions in my mind. And, this is really going to be interesting talking to you, who's been playing a stellar role as a leader in just changing Mahindra into what it is today. So without taking further much time, I just wanted to start since, I find your journey very, very interesting. And, you've been such a good student academically, your professional journey. So if you could I always like to ask people a little bit about their personal and professional journey. And what were the highlights of your journey? So if you could spend 5 minutes with us talking about it.
Okay. So Rekha, thank you for inviting me for doing this session. I'm really looking forward to it, interacting with the members of AIMA. And as I look at the names of participants, there are some very big names from the industry who are listening, and therefore makes me nervous because I don't know if I can tell them anything that they don't know. And Srinivas, Thar is designed to be self-driven. If you have a driver driving Thar, you are insulting the vehicle. So I'm glad that you're driving it yourself. You have talked about several things. So let me first, you said, talk about my journey over in 5 minutes. So see, I was like an engineering student, and there are a lot of kids at that time. You either become a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. That's it. I mean, there are not so many options, and I chose to become an engineer. I was lucky to get into IIT Kanpur for my undergrad degree. And I think some people think that IITs are over stated, but I do believe that the kind of education that you get at IIT really works for you all your life. And when you go to US and interact with people there at top-notch universities, like Cornell University, where I was, there's no reason to believe even for a second that IITs cannot match up to these universities in terms of quality of education, and that happens there. At that time, of course, quality of research was nowhere near what it was in those universities. Quality of education was as good as you can find anywhere else. And at that time, it was fashionable, almost like an automatic thing that you apply to go to USA after you get your undergrad from IIT. And half of us managed to go there at that time. Now that's not fashionable, and I'm glad it is not. But that time, there weren't too many opportunities in India. for an engineer who wanted to be in engineering and not really become an entrepreneur. There are not too many opportunities in India, and I think best of the students ended up going outside India, unfortunately, and so did I. Got to Cornell University, did my PhD there, and I think I was very lucky to get a job at General Motors, because in those days, late 70s, a job at GM was like dream come true. There couldn't have been a better job for an engineer, especially a mechanical engineer, than to get a job at General Motors. Worked there for 14 years, and then my wife decided, I shouldn't say my wife and I should say my wife decided it's time to go home. And therefore we packed our bags, came home and looked for opportunities in India. There are a lot of stories already written about it, so I won't go into it, but ended up in Mahindra. I don't think I could have chosen a better company to work for. I returned to India, because for somebody coming back from US after working for a company like GM for 14 years, it could have been very easy to get disappointed with what's happening here and pack bags again and go back. But Mahindra gave me the opportunity to explore R&D, to build an R&D for Mahindra, which at that time, as you said, was primitive, and also invest in new products. Not too many companies at that time would have thought about investing 500, 600 crores in designing a brand new product for the company, especially given that we had very little expertise in developing a new product. And that was perhaps the biggest bet that Mahindra had taken, to work on a Scorpio and invest 550 crores for that project. And leading that project was a dream come true for any engineer, specifically an automotive engineer. Again, there cannot be a better opportunities than that to anyone. And then, of course, after Scorpio, the company decided to move me away from R&D to general management. And slowly I started running the automotive business, and then the tractor automotive business, and then retired as MD and CEO of Mahindra. Been a wonderful journey from where I started to where I ended. It's almost, I call it a fairy tale. And not too many professionals will get that opportunity to test so many different things, test out so many different things, to be able to study in IIT and Cornell, two of the best known universities in this part and that part of the world, to be working for General Motors, the most revered job at that time in automotive industry, in fact, many industries, and then to come back to India, work for Mahindra, be able to contribute in development of the automobile industry overall in some small way. And like you said, for shareholders, develop some sort of value out of owning Mahindra shares. I'm also a Mahindra shareholder, so I don't mind the share prices going up either. So it's been a wonderful journey, and I guess the final chapter, which is sort of in front of us now for me personally, is even more exciting in some sense, because as I was preparing for formal retirement from Mahindra and wondering what to do. Of course, relaxing and enjoying life was one part of that, but that couldn't have been only part, because if that was the only part, I probably would have got bored with that after about 1 month. So many things, opportunities just fell on my lap. Chairing the scale committee, where we are trying to scale up manufacturing in India, and looking at industries outside auto industry. It was so fascinating for me to be able to interact with so many different industries, so many different players in the industries, and see the opportunities in all of these. And then to get the space role, something that I never thought I will ever do. I knew very little about the space, and to get that role and be able to chair IITs and all, it's almost a perfect retirement or post-retirement. I would in fact say that probably a bit too much, but all the same, my wife is very happy that I'm as engaged now as I was before my formal retirement. So that's the 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I think your response has been very modest to what you've achieved. And, it's been a real journey of excellence, if I may call it. Really, before moving on to manufacturing, Dr. Goenka, Rekha talked about InSpace, and you gave us a little bit as an intro on the InSpace. What is really InSpace about? I know that, the government is trying to sort of facilitate private sector investment in space, including startups. Also, the in-space is supposed to be a sort of a facilitator, regulator of what the space, ISRO and its facilities, the space department. What do you find what exciting things are happening here? And if you could share us a couple of things, if you're allowed to share.
Sure. So let me put my foot in my mouth, and I hope I won't get in trouble for saying this. But when I got a call or a mail saying that I'm being appointed chairman of InSpace, I had to go to Google to find out what InSpace was. And so that's where I started. And today I'm chairing it. Now, see, I'll just take a minute or two. It's a very interesting area. Many of you would know that Government of India had decided in 2019, announced in 2019, the new space direction. And in 2020, it had opened up space for private sector and had announced that they will be forming organization or vertical called InSpace, which will facilitate the participation of private sector in space and also authorize, because right now space activity is primarily limited to ISRO, and therefore there is no authorization required because it's all within the government. But when private sector starts getting into space, then they have to be authorized to be able to launch vehicles or spacecrafts or payloads. So the whole point here is that the space sector for India is significantly under-leveraged. The overall space economy globally is about $400 billion. For India, it is only about $7 billion. So that's just about 2% of the overall global economy, where India is amongst the top 5 or 6 countries in the world in terms of space technology and space infrastructure. There is no other sector that I can think of where India can claim to be in top 5 or 6, no other tech sector. I'm not talking of services like IT and all, of course, India is leading, but I'm talking about technology, hardware technology kind of sector. There's no other sector that India can claim to be, to the best of my knowledge, in the top 5, 6 in the world. Yet we have only 2% of the overall space economy in India. So the idea here is, the objective here is that how do we take that 2% to become 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, that maybe I don't want to put a number in front of us right now, and take $7 billion to 35, 40, $45 billion, right? And we realize that it cannot happen simply by ISRO continuing to do what it's doing and participation of just the government agency in space. Private sectors have to come in a very big way. And in fact, in all the advanced space sector economies, it is the private sector that's playing the major role, not the government or not the space agencies. And that's the whole opportunity here, and that's the whole objective of setting up InSpace. Now, fortunately, in India, the space bug has hit the startups. And there are at least 50, maybe 60, 70, 80 startups that are already playing in the space sector. And none of them are, except for very, very few, are more than 2, 3 years old. They're very fresh. Space sector has been supported by industry in a big way in terms of being vendors to ISRO, but not in terms of owning technology, not in terms of doing end-to-end work in space. And what we are doing now through the startups primarily, and also the more established players, to see if the private sector can develop technology for space. Can they launch the rockets? Can they have their own rockets and launch it? Can they have satellites that they design and build? Can they have the payloads that will do various things that space can do? And as you all know, that space touches our life in more ways than any of us imagine. From the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, and even when you're sleeping, the space is working for you, right? How do you make it more common, more prominent, more value-driven, and add to economy? So that's the mandate in some sense. And being a totally new organization, I being the first chairman of it, the first employee, and not just the chairman, the first employee of InSpace, it's in a sense a clean sheet to write on it and kind of set a scope within the bounds of the whatever the cabinet approval is, to set our own direction, set our own scope on what we want to do. And what I'm most excited about is that there's so much opportunity and there's so much excitement in the private sector about opening up the space economy for everyone to play in, and so much excitement outside India, companies wanting to now come into India. And obviously, we should not be making it India only or Indian only play. It has to be a play where India is a playground where Indian company as well as overseas company can come and play.
Thank you. Thank you for educating us. As you said, when you were first approached, you didn't know what InSpace was. So we had just heard of the acronym.
Didn't know about InSpace as much as the chairman of InSpace does.
So thanks for updating us on this. You said something about, the manufacturing in your opening comments when you said that India has a huge potential. Okay. And I'm not only saying it in AIMA forum. I've heard you in CII and I've heard you you're very passionate about manufacturing. Okay. Now we hear different kinds of debate, whether India has touched its potential. The GDP contributor of manufacturing is not as much as it's supposed to be. I know that the Indian government under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister has been working on Atmanirbhar Bharat. You are heading a very important committee of scale that Rekha talked about earlier. What are your views? Because, has manufacturing, of course, manufacturing has achieved a lot. But when we talk about manufacturing ecosystem, we talk about jobs, we talk about revenues to the government, in terms of GDP multiplier. What is your view, whether how much India has achieved? And if you could just give us some sense, in terms of what the potential could be.
So, Srinivas, two things that I can say for sure to begin with. First of all, I would say that the support from government and putting your money where your mouth is, as we say, from the government side, has never been better than what I have seen in the last 18 months, post-COVID, let's say, right? And before that also, there was a lot of talk about manufacturing, but nothing very tangible that was on the table that we can say, yes, government is very serious about manufacturing. Now we can see that. From the time the Atmanirbhar Bharat phrase was coined by the Prime Minister till today, not just in terms of PLI scheme, and we'll talk more about it, but in terms of the trust that the various ministries are putting on manufacturing, in terms of time that the very senior ministers and very senior bureaucrats are spending on how to grow manufacturing. I have been involved for the last 27 years, of course, only automotive in the earlier part, but now a little bit broader. I have not seen this kind of trust. Now, clearly, I wish, and everybody here wish, that it had happened 10 years ago. Because if it had happened 10 years ago, we'll be in a much better situation today than what we are in. And we will not be talking about 15, 16% contribution of GDP coming from manufacturing, but talking about 20% plus. But like they say, better late than never. So I'm glad that it's happening. And the big question that gets asked often in many forums is, have we missed the bus? Is it too late for us to focus on manufacturing? Can we really catch up with the biggies like China? I believe that we have not missed the bus, but we are behind. We are behind and we have to run from here. We cannot be walking from here. If we walk from here, we will never get there. We have to run from here and take some very bold steps to be able to, I won't say catch up, but to be able to be counted as a manufacturing nation globally. Today, as a manufacturing nation globally, I mean, our probably manufacturing output globally, I don't have the number, but will be in single digit, may not be even single, I mean, may not be in high single digit, maybe 3-4%, as you look at sector after sector after sector. So we have opportunities and we have to work hard at it. It won't happen simply by wishing. It won't happen because you want it, I want it, the Honorable Prime Minister wants it, or anybody else wants it. It will have to be worked hard upon to make it happen. And there is no silver bullet. There's no magic wand. We cannot say that if I did 1, 2, 3, all the problems are solved. We will have to look at each sector separately and then look at what is it that we need to do and what is it that we can do, because we cannot do everything. Because we do have to also be careful about other sectors. We have to be careful about the social requirements, everything. So we cannot put all the government money into growing manufacturing. It has to be measured. And PLI scheme is obviously a big sort of enabler that has come in. Now, I can go on and talk about specific things that need to be done in specific sectors, but I will sort of give it back to you to see what you want to talk about, because that will, if I start on that, it will take forever. So I'll leave it to you to see what you want to talk about.
Since you talked about, achieving scale on various sectors, what are your personal views? Because I know the scale committee talks about doubling export target in 5 years, halving the import targets in 5 years, achieving a $1 trillion manufacturing economy. Do you realistically think, as you said, if we really run and not walk, do you realistically think these targets are very achievable with what, and the second question is, how do subsidies like PLI really accelerate this process?
So let me first say that if you really want to become a manufacturing nation, where manufacturing plays a key role in the economy, it cannot happen simply by manufacturing for domestic demand, right? It cannot simply happen by localizing what we are importing. Because let's say we are importing $400 billion today. The 400 can become 300, can become 250. You don't want it to become zero. It cannot and it should not become zero. So that's the only thing that you have if you are only focusing on localizing and catering to the domestic market. You have to cater to the global markets. That's the only way you will have a double-digit growth in manufacturing for multiple years for you to get to 20% plus contribution from manufacturing. Now, catering to global markets, basically, if you were to kind of put it in sort of very summary form, are 3 requirements that have to be met. Number 1, quality. Okay, and India, unfortunately, though we have made a huge progress in quality from where we were 20 years ago, still has not matched up to really what a global level of quality requirement is. Okay, and we can again talk about more of that if you have interest. Second is technology. And in many sectors, automotive included, technology is all imported. There's very little technology development that we have done in many sectors, not all sectors, many sectors, technology is all important. We have very little that we can say that this product is made based on technology developed in India. And if you are making based on technology developed somewhere else, you are only a manufacturer. And just being a manufacturer is not enough to add value to the economy. You have to be somebody who owns the product, owns the technology in a sense. So that's the second thing that needs to be done. And we all know that the overall contribution, that overall investment that India has in R&D is only about 1.5, 1.7% of GDP against 3.5, 4% of countries that have done extremely well in manufacturing in other areas. So that's the second one. And third one is cost competitiveness. Now, cost competitiveness, many of us talk about the low labor cost, and therefore India is very competitive. That is not true at all. But labor cost is just, depending on industry, is 4%, 5%, 8%, 9%, 10% of the total cost of production. And that in itself cannot make you competitive. There are many factors, and again, we can talk about it more if there's interest, that make India non-competitive in cost. So we have to really attack all 3, the technology, the quality, and the cost competitiveness, if we wanted to really become, really start running from where we are and get to a point where we have $1 trillion manufacturing economy, which will then contribute 20% plus to our overall GDP. So it's doable, but not easy. Then there are very few low-hanging fruits. We have to really climb high up the tree to pluck the fruit.
Sure. So just 2 connected questions. You talked about technology and R&D. And, I've heard this in various forums like CII and all, where, a lot of experts come and say that Indian corporate sector is not doing enough in terms of R&D, and we need to really, sort of accelerate the process. What could be 2, 3 specific things that the industry and the academic institutions in India could look at? Now, I think even in academic institutions, it's happening in bits and pockets, IIT and a few other, maybe Indian Institute of Science, but not really across like the US, where every university is huge into R&D. So just wanted your take on this as to how we could accelerate the process.
So see, I have the fortune of being able to see it from both sides, as being chairman of IIT Madras and Bombay BOG, as well as being an industry person. And I would say that on both sides, there is lack of full information of what is happening. The kind of research that is being done, at least at IITs and IISc, I won't say at all engineering, at all colleges, but few colleges, the top 15, 20 in R&D, is fairly high quality. and fairly practical. Yes, for IITs, the KRA is how many papers you write. That is true. I mean, that's true for every university, even in US. How many papers you write determines your promotion and not how much product gets into the production phase. That is the KRA, but still, there is a lot of work being done that is relevant for the industry. And somehow the Indian industry does not believe that R&D, that IITs or Indian institutes can do relevant research for them. Okay, and we need to change that. We need to break that. And fortunately, on 31st May, this can be a little marketing for me. 31st May, we are organizing a mega R&D fair of all IITs. All IITs will participate to showcase the kind of work that is being done at IITs relevant to the industry. It is focused on industry. It is not focused on government. It's focused on industry. We are hoping that we'll get good participation from captains of the industry to kind of tell them what is being done at IITs and invite them to use what is already available and participate in future development. So I think if somehow we can bring this, and it's easier said than done because this effort has been going on for decades on how do you bring industry and IITs, ISC together to work on research that will translate to product and service. And because research going into paper is of no value. Research is of value only if it translates to product and service. And I think the overall mindset of the professors who are doing the research is not that my work ends at writing the paper. They would very much like to see it going into the hands of the industry. But one very good thing, Srinivas, that is happening is the startups are bridging the gap that we have between what the IITs do and what the industry needs. Because startups are willing to take risks with technology that is not completely cooked yet. Technology that still needs more further development, and they will take a technology coming out of an IIT or ISC and take it forward and work on it and make a successful product or service out of it. Not all succeed, many fail, but that's the value that they're adding. So in some sense, unplanned, startup ecosystem is creating that bridge between the research work being done in the institutes and what the sort of traditional legacy industry would want to accept, right? So this is one thing that's very important that needs to be done. A lot of people talk about R&D incentive. A lot of people in almost every meeting, the industry puts forward the demand for weighted average tax reduction, which we used to have a few years ago. And I am not with the industry in this. I believe that in R&D should not be done for sake of getting a tax break. It should be done because you see value in it. And when you start doing R&D, if you look at the automotive industry, for example, Indian automotive industry, the Indian companies, from where we were and where we are, all Indian companies in the last 20 years, I think the growth has happened on the platform of R&D. It's not happened because of anything else. It's because all these companies invested in R&D, and they invested without the benefit of the weighted average tax break. Yes, they were happy to take it when it was available, but they didn't invest because it was available. They invested because this is the right thing to do for the business. Similarly, I think everybody has to look at R&D not as a nice thing to do, but a thing that will take your business to the next plateau, the next platform, which will allow you to create product and services for export and not just for domestic requirement. So I think this is a mindset change that has to happen. Unfortunately, it's not happened yet. Unfortunately, still there is a belief that R&D is fancy stuff. Everything I can license from somewhere else and make my product. But I do believe that if you really want to become a powerful, respected manufacturing country, we have to have an own R&D, the own product, own IPR. And the government is quite sensitive to it. They are short of saying that I will give you weighted average tax reduction, which they've said very clearly that we will not. They're doing almost everything else that can be done. In fact, in India, about 2/3 plus of R&D is supported by government funds. Only 1/3 is supported by the industry, whereas it's other way around in most advanced nations, where 2/3 plus is supported by the industry and only 1/3 by the government.
Thank you, Dr. Goenka. I think very valid observations, and I think the key takeaway from this is that Indian corporate sector really has to up its investment in R&D to really gain that scale and, quality of products that we're talking about. And you've shown it in Mahindra and Mahindra. So, it's best. There is proof of, the pudding. I'd like to move on to a connected issue, and that is you made a comment about productive labor, quality labor. How do you look at the labor situation in India? One is, of course, we have a separate skill development ministry. I think the Prime Minister has talked about it in no less than 10 occasions that I've heard him. He always talks about skilling. He talks about productivity of labor. There is also this other thing about, asset-light companies coming. Engineers prefer jobs in plush AC offices compared to manufacturing units. And India is going through all this. So if we really want to be China plus one alternative, what are some of the key things that you'd look at? One is in terms of labor productivity. Can we employ new technologies such as machine learning to really upskill our labor, make them more productive? And also, how much do you believe that, and I'm coming to the debate about India being office of the world or factory of the world. I'm not saying one can just, cannibalize the other. You could do both. But what are your thoughts on all this? And how could India really take advantage? And a lot of work needs to be done on this. So any suggestions on that?
Srinivas, this is a very difficult question in the sense that there will be a lot of different views and that different people would have depending on which side of the elephant are you touching, right? I believe that Indian labor is quite hardworking. There is this belief that sometimes you want to talk about that Indian labor is not as productive. It is not that Indian labor is not as productive. It's that Indian processes are not as productive. So productivity comes from what kind of process do we lay out in a plant floor? How do we balance the automation and manual work? And then only measure the output. So when we talk about the productivity is X per unit of labor, we are not including in that the fact that we have much lower automation than what we are comparing others with, right? And therefore we need to be fair on that. Now, I think that over the years, the attitude of labor has changed. And I need to be a little careful here because I observe only automotive industry and tractor industry, where perhaps the labor is more mature in terms of the outlook, much better paid also. And much better paid also makes them more mature and more pragmatic, more sort of practical than maybe in other industries. But what I have found is that in my dealing with labor unions here in India, compared to dealing other places in the world, I find that Indian labor and the labor management is very pragmatic. Yes, they want to increase the income, earnings and wages of the members, that they should, but they are at the same time sensitive to the fact that if we are not competitive, we will not grow. And therefore, they don't come in the way of increasing productivity, increasing output, bringing in the sort of multi-skilling, bringing in job rotation, all of these things, which used to be a big sort of wall if you go back 20 years ago or 30 years ago, right? In the days of the famous labor union leaders, which everybody who is old enough will remember and be fearful of. So I think the Indian labor can take us in terms of what they need to do, And of course, they have a limited role to play. Where we will have little problem in terms of the labor is the reskilling. A lot of the Indian labor may not be up to the mark in terms of being able to reskill for what Industry 4.0 would require. And that's one of my big concerns, that how do you reskill the factory worker that you have in most of our plants, and more so those who are working for MSMEs than working for the large OEMs. The large OEMs labor would be different. They are almost like, an average worker in automotive factories, OEM factories, earn 70,000-80,000 rupees a month. So they are not, this is without overtime. So they are not poorly paid people anymore. And therefore, they're well to do, they have good houses, appliances, that children go to good schools. And therefore their whole attitude in life is different than what one thinks of in terms of labor. So that part is not too bad. We can take care of it by a proper management sort of attitude towards labor. And we should not always think about how can I save 5 rupees in the wages by negotiating hard. Because remember that only is 5, 6, 7% of your total cost and not the major cost. The major cost is your input cost, like electricity cost. Okay. So labor is not a big problem. The bigger problem that I see is our system is inefficient. The whole ecosystem is inefficient, and that's what we need to improve on. Now, where is the inefficiency coming from? The first one is for most of us, the logistic cost makes us non-competitive on a global platform. On India, of course, we all have the same cost, so it doesn't matter. But on a global platform, that makes it non-competitive because we have about 5 percentage point disadvantage on an average compared to, let's say, China or Vietnam or European countries in terms of logistic cost, 13% versus 8%, right? Which is our system inefficiency. And it's not all up to the government to fix that. A lot of inefficiency is because of how we do logistics in the industry. We need to bring that down, and this Gati Shakti program that the government of India has launched is obviously aimed at that. And everyone in the government who matters is well aware of the fact that logistic cost is a very big disadvantage, competitive disadvantage for us. That's the second one is power. Our power cost, industrial power cost is higher than most manufacturing nations. And the reason for that is not that our power is more expensive. The reason there is a cross subsidy, right? And when we are giving free power to somebody else is paying for it, and mostly industry is paying for it. And the government needs to look at the subsidies can be given, but not at the cost of industry. The subsidy cost has to come from the general fund of the government of India and not at the cost of industry. So that's the second big, and again, government is very well seized of this problem. They don't have a quick solution because power is a state subject, and each state deals with it in their own way. But they are aware that the power cost is making Indian manufacturing somewhat non-competitive. Land cost. India probably has one of the most expensive land in the for any new industry to be set up, right? Even countries like Korea or Eastern Europe, for sure, will have much cheaper land that India has in terms of setting up a new factory. And again, there are reasons for it. Some justified, some not justified, but that's what it is. That makes it difficult to set up a new unit, and it's almost impossible to make a new unit profitable without government subsidy that all of us try and get when you're setting up a new unit. But the biggest sort of disabler, I think, for us, in my view, is the scale. Manufacturing cost finally is all about the scale. And unfortunately, we have too many people trying to do too many things and nobody is getting enough scale. So if you look at automotive industry, for example, automotive industry in India is the 5th largest or 6th largest in the world in terms of revenue, right? Yet India has only one supplier in the top 50 of the world, only one, okay? And that too has happened through all the acquisitions that they have done outside India. And there's no other supplier who is in top 50s. That means no one has the kind of scale that a global supplier has, and therefore becomes very difficult to compete globally for these suppliers, because the fixed cost then becomes very high on a per unit basis. And that's the reason I keep talking about the scale. And a lot of people said, look, how can I set up capacity when I don't have demand? But you look at China, that's how they grew. That's how they grew manufacturing, by setting up capacity before the demand was there. And one of my colleagues used to always say that demand comes to those who have capacity. And when the demand comes, it won't wait for 2 years for you to set up the capacity. It will go somewhere else if you don't have capacity. So therefore, I know it's a difficult thing for CEO to convince his or her CFO that it's okay for me to invest even though I don't have good visibility of demand. But we will have to do that and take some calculated risk and a little bit of a leap of faith to set up capacity before demand. One of the examples that I will give you is in the furniture sector, that the state of Tamil Nadu, under SCALE's guidance, has set up a large furniture park on 1,100 acres. Now, today, you cannot imagine a park that is just making furniture on 1,100 acres. That's a leap of faith that they have taken, right? And create a furniture park which will be competing with the best in Vietnam and best in China. And if you don't do that, if you don't create a furniture park which can compete with best in India, China, and Vietnam, we can never export in a big way. It'll remain into millions rather than hundreds of millions, right? And the opportunity since furniture came up is so big. Furniture is a $50 billion industry in terms of trade, not just the industry sector, in terms of trade. And India is $500 million. Now, given our quote unquote cheap labor, given our artisans that we have, the carpenters that we have, why should India be 1% of the total global trade in furniture? Because you never created a scale. You cannot be exporting by having a carpenter using a hammer to put a nail in, or using this grinder or whatever you call it to keep doing this to sort of get your wood plain. You have to use processes, you have to use machines, you have to have scale. So again, I can give you many examples where without scale, we cannot be globally competitive for the purpose of export. We can be competitive for inside India consumption only till we have a barrier for somebody to bring it from outside without having heavy barrier of duty. The moment the duty barrier comes down, again, we'll become non-competitive like China is today. So there are lots of goods that can come in from China to India, in spite of the logistic costs, in spite of the duty, import duty, they are still significantly cheaper than what we can do in India, right? Which is part of it is one never understands how the China economics works. The numbers you can never add up. So that I don't know what the secret is inside. But part of it is because they have the scale and therefore lower cost.
Yeah. So I think you've put it very well that, that's why an entrepreneur is different. He takes the risk.
Absolutely.
Believes in something, then, capacity always has to come before demand, get the maximum return out of it.
And say automotive industry, frankly, has done a good job at it. And I'm sorry to sort of talk about auto industry in this, but it's a good example. It's a good example for other industries to look at as to how automotive industry almost 25 years ago believed that to become Atmanirbhar, though the word was not invented at that time, one has to invest in capacity and one has to invest in engineering. That is R&D, right? And those who didn't, you will know the big names from that time. They don't exist today.
Yeah.
And those who did are competing very well. In fact, I was very happy to see that the share of the Indian automotive companies has been the highest in last 5 or 6 years and last year. And the two major companies are growing their market share constantly now because of products that they have been able to launch and the capacity that they have been able to create.
Thank you. I can go on and on, Dr. Goenka, but I see that there is just 10 minutes left.
Is that
quite a few questions on the chat box? So I'll now switch to the audience questions. There is a question from Mumtaz Ali Khan who says that why did Mahindra's foray into passenger car collaboration with Renault work out despite both being iconic automobile companies?
Well, let's not get into Mahindra questions in this interaction. We can do that separately. Right now, I'm not Mahindra. I've retired, so wouldn't want to talk about that.
Sure. We respect that. So I'll move on to the next question. Dr. Anis Ansari asks, how can India improve markets and quality production in MSMEs, especially since you talked about furniture and, especially in handlooms, khadi and handicrafts?
So this is a very good question. And again, I probably have a bit of a contrary view on this than what most people would say. See, we always think of MSMEs as becharas, if you understand the Hindi word. I don't think there's any reason why we should think of them as becharas. They are the backbone of manufacturing. Without MSMEs, there cannot be any manufacturing. No Mahindra, no Tata, no one can make a car without MSMEs, and 60% of value add, at least in automotive industry happens from MSMEs. So they're not becharas by any stretch of imagination, right? Now, as a result of that thinking, we only talk about some kind of financial help that can be given through tax benefits, through this and that to the MSMEs. That in itself is not going to be enough to make MSMEs stronger. The best example of strength of MSME perhaps is Germany, where they have this famous, I forget the name, that they have where MSMEs are really as strong as OEMs. So where MSMEs are lacking today, and I think the onus of correcting that is not on the government. The onus of correcting that is on MSMEs themselves and the large OEMs who source from MSMEs. Where they're lacking today is the sense of quality and process that large OEMs has not percolated down to MSMEs in the same way, right? And even MSMEs come in different shapes and sizes, because in India today now 98% companies are MSME by definition. So I'm not talking about the big MSMEs, I'm talking about the real MSMEs that should be looked at as MSME. So the sensitivity and importance to quality and processes is not there the same way as it is in large OEMs now. Large OEMs by and large have become pretty good now in every industry. I'm not just talking automotive now, right? And the onus of correcting that obviously cannot be on the government. Onus of correcting that has to be on the large companies and on MSMEs themselves, right? And large companies have to work very hard with MSMEs. And auto industry, again, many companies have strong programs to work with MSMEs in this regard, to ensure that the quality and process of MSMEs are as strong as it is for the OEMs. The second thing that is a problem is that we talked about industry not spending enough on R&D. MSMEs is almost zero, right? Now, if government wants to help MSMEs, I think the best help would come by creating an ecosystem by which MSMEs can also participate in R&D, by creating clusters for doing R&D work, which is relevant to MSMEs and not to the large players. And MSMEs have to become strong in technology and the quality and process. It cannot be, MSMEs cannot be something which is a compromise over what the OEMs do in terms of technology or quality of process. It has to be same as what the MSMEs do, or OEMs do. And if we can do that, then I think we have enough MSME bandwidth in India for MSMEs to become the real strength of manufacturing. And today they are feeding into the OEMs, but they are not the real strength that we need for them to be because of what I just talked about. And again, this may be a little bit controversial. Not everybody agrees with me. I've mentioned this many times, and sometimes I get these raised eyebrows that what am I talking about? But I firmly believe that that's what needs to be done. And see, look, I take a lot of pride in the fact that there are many suppliers in auto industry today who were in sort of one tin shed 25 years ago, and working with OEMs like Mahindra, Tata, and others. Today they have become 1,000 crore supplier, and today they have because they're as professional as the OEMs are. Today they have. So we need many more like this. Almost 95% should be like that, not just exception of 5 or 10%.
Yep.
I don't know, Dr. Ansari, does it make sense to you if I should ask you? Is it there?
Dr. Ansari, are you there?
He would be on mute, I think.
Oh, okay.
Okay, carry on.
One question has come with regard to the disruption that the global auto industry is facing, and that is to do with green mobility, shared mobility. We are also in this country, at least are aspiring to do. If you hear the government speaking, if you hear the private sector speaking about electrification of fleets, various companies are announcing their policies, though technology is still more expensive. What are your thoughts on all this? Whether India is making enough efforts, Indian auto industry is really gearing up? If you could give your take on this.
So again, this is a subject that I can talk on for about an hour, and we have only a few minutes left, so I'll just try to be very quick. EVs are here. Nobody can wish them away. Okay, and the reason I'm saying that nobody can wish them away, that there are some players who still believe that EVs will not happen and are waiting in the wings. Okay, there are sectors where EVs are more natural today, and there are sectors which will take a little bit longer for EVs to become to create a pull for EVs. The sectors that are most natural today are the three-wheeler and the two-wheeler. Okay, because the technology is very simple in three and two-wheelers, because and I'm not getting into the recent spate of fires that we have, which is unfortunate, so I won't get into that right now, but technology is very simple in two and three-wheelers. The barrier of entry is very low. Many players, lots of new players have come in. In fact, it may just redefine the pecking order in terms of the big players in two and three-wheelers. And today there is no commercial disadvantage in buying a two or three-wheeler of electric, and therefore you will see a significant fast growth in it. The one that will take probably a little bit longer is the passenger vehicle, because they're still more expensive, and the payback is not there unless you're driving 100 kilometer plus every day, which most of us don't drive. And they'll take longer, but I don't think it's very far, because it's just a matter of time when the crossover will happen. Now, Government of India has really supported electric vehicles. Most people don't realize how much support is there when you add up everything. And I would like to think that if you were to add up all the support that Government of India is giving for electric vehicle, India may be the highest government incentive for EVs than any other country at any time in the world, right? GST only 5% compared to as much as 50% on IC engine vehicle, so that's a 45% lower GST. FAME benefit of 1.5 to 2 lakh rupees per vehicle, and then now the PLI, which will be 13% of the total cost of the electric vehicle. So if you add it up, government is really putting a lot of money behind it. And I have said this in many forums that now it is the turn of the industry to stop asking what more should the government do, but to stop launching new products, start investing in backward integration, localization, because unfortunately still most of what goes into EV is imported, and we cannot afford that, because the ICE engine car is significantly localized. If we don't localize electric vehicle, then we are giving jobs away, which are going to go out of the country. So a lot of effort is to go into localizing and putting in scale again, and launching a lot of new products. Right now, we have very few products in the four-wheeler segment. We have enough in two-wheeler, we have few in three-wheeler, but very few in four-wheeler. The industry has to launch many more products. And I think EV is one of those sectors which, even though we have a late start, undoubtedly, like in many other things, but it can really give us tremendous opportunities outside India, not just in India, if we can have the right product, not to compete with the Teslas of the world. I don't think we need to go there, but to have the kind of product that India will use, Indian consumer will use, and there are many countries in the world where that kind of product is the right product, not the Tesla kind of product. So I think that's where India needs to create a niche for itself and become a global supplier of components, of technology and products in the electric vehicle segment.
Thank you for that insight. We have our past president, Mr. Rajiv Kaul with us, and he has a question for you. Rajiv, the floor is yours.
I'm always worried when Rajiv Kaul asks a question. Okay, Rajiv.
Lovely seeing you, Pawan. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I enjoyed hearing you. Mine's a very macro question, Pawan, if I may. You know, the governments, and not just the current government, but even the last government has been talking of this achieving 25% of GDP in the manufacturing sector. And somehow we seem to be stuck at just over half that percentage. Now, do you feel that the focus that they're giving on defense, and you gave the example of EV, the PLI schemes, all that will help us actually increase our GDP? Because I think to achieve that, we have to have GDP growth of industry double that of the services sector? And that's my question.
Rajiv, your math is absolutely bang on. See, for percentage contribution to GDP to grow for manufacturing, services have to slow down. Yeah. Also, in some sense, right? And you don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
Therefore, I will not worry too much about what percentage of GDP is coming from manufacturing. I'll worry more about what growth we are seeing in manufacturing. And what I would be happy to see is if manufacturing grows at 10-12% a year for the next 5 to 7 years with the help of PLI scheme that has come in. After that, if services also grow 10-12%, if it remains 16%, I won't worry about it.
It'd be fantastic. My worry will be all delighted.
So if manufacturing, I mean, what we need to focus on is a double-digit growth of manufacturing for the next 5 to 7 years.
Are we likely to achieve it this year and next year? I mean, what are the forecasts?
If you look at what happened in export this year, that was amazing, $420 billion export, which was announced by Commerce Ministry. Everybody thought that they were just putting a number in the air. But I must tell you one thing that I don't know if everyone knows about it. So just not a number thrown out by a minister or something like that. Tremendous level of work had happened at the ground level before that number was thrown out, was published. Each embassy or high commission was given a target of how much they have to achieve. Each industry sector was given a target of what they have to achieve. And only after adding up those numbers was the 400 billion target announced. So I have not seen this kind of detailing done in the government. Of course, I didn't have that visibility either, but now that I have some visibility, I was so impressed with the planning that was done. So I would say that 10 to 12% is doable, but to compare it to last year, the year before may not be the right comparison because we had the artificial slowdown because of COVID. We need to go back to 2019 and see from there how much we are growing. If we invest in the kind of sectors where we have tremendous export opportunity, we would definitely go there. And I would even put sectors, Rajiv, into 3 buckets. The sort of sunrise sectors where we need to invest. Otherwise, we will have a solar panel kind of thing where everything will come from China, right? There are many sunrise sectors, EV being one of them, drones, CCTV, for example. The second one is technology sector, where I would put space, which is my new love. I didn't know much about it 6 months ago. And also I would say with medical devices, technology sectors where we need to invest. And third one are the sectors where we have, which are job employment generation sector, because India does need to add $1 million employment every month to keep its people employed. And they have furniture, automobiles, marine, textile, leather and footwear, toys, many such sectors are there. So I think all of these investments that they are done and strategy is made for each sector. To get to 10 to 12% is not that difficult from where we are, but we have to work on multiple fronts and in an aligned manner to make it happen, keeping in mind those 3 things: technology, quality, and scale. That is competitiveness.
Thank you so much. That's a very comprehensive answer with a lot of clarity. Thank you. That's what we expect from you, and that's what we're getting. Thank you so much, Pawan.
Thanks, Rajiv. I hope everything is well in Calcutta.
Yeah, thank you. Things are getting better and better in Calcutta. Come over now.
I'm coming next week for a day.
Okay. Get in touch.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Rajiv. And we really overshot on your time, Dr. Goenka. While, this could have gone on. And I clearly, with your experience and wealth of knowledge, I clearly see that 1 hour is not enough because there were still lots and lots of questions in the chat box. But like everything, all good things have to come to an end. So once again, really a big thank you from the bottom of my heart. AIMA really appreciates you taking time off. And once again, we'll love to explore more ideas with you in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Srinivas. Thank you, Rekha, for organizing it. I really enjoyed the interaction with the AIMA members. Thank
So
you.
we had over 400 logged on to the social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
And if you have time to see the chat box, there are some wonderful comments coming on your lectures.
Okay, I will take a look.
Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you all. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope you'll join us for the next Leaders Speak program on Friday, if I'm not mistaken, next Friday, with Ambassador Kamal Sibal. So thank you, Dr. Goenka, for a wonderful session. I think the comments say it all. I don't really need to say much. And the number of people who logged on say it all. It was wonderful having you with us.
Thank you, Rekha. If I don't know how I can get a copy of the chat box, I like to go through the question that people have.
I'll send that to you. I will send all the questions and the chat to you. If you can share your number, I can just WhatsApp it to you. Separately send it.
Phone number? Yeah, I will separately send it to you.
Yeah, can separately send it. Thanks, Srini. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for moderating this session.
Thank you. You had some very good, insightful questions, and insightful questions are always the beginning of useful answer.
Thank you. And would love to, if ever you are in Goa, please call on us. We'd love to have you.
Certainly do that. Do not miss on that offer.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good
Bye-bye.
evening. Bye-bye.